Anyone with a question? Up back here.
Using the power you have, even in terms of elections, I guess from kind of a magical ceremonial worldview, I've looked at elections as like sort of as a ceremony and as like kind of a giant illusion puppet show ceremony kind of thing, the legitimacy of which our participation tends to maintain. And I'm just wondering if, I don't know, kind of if you could expand on that a little bit more, because my take on it so far has been kind of like, that whole spectacle kind of needs to be disrupted somehow in order for that illusion and that spell to be broken, since it's not actually a system that has majority support. And
yeah, I can speak to that.
So,
I guess.
And sorry, and like right now, it's come up. I often like refer to the Zapatistas in Mexico as like an example of a counter power and a counter other ways to do things. But I guess it's actually recently come up over the last year that the National Indigenous Congress in Mexico and the Zapatistas are running an indigenous woman for president, but in a way that is not like embracing the legitimacy of the elections.
Yeah, I would say the elections are a spectacle, but they're not just an illusion. And believe me, from the perspective of the United States right now, I can tell you that who gets elected makes one huge, enormous difference. And all the people who before the last elections were saying, you know, I don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. Well, I'm here to tell you that even if you consider Clinton would have been the lesser of two evils, the worser of two evils is one hell of a lot worse and is doing irreparable damage to the entire world. So I don't think we can disrupt the spectacle by not voting. I think you're not voting and not participating makes no difference whatsoever to the spectacle. I think your voting actually can make a difference. I think if you want to disrupt the spectacle, the way that we do that is by creating other spectacles that are real, by creating models, by creating moments of powerful action. For example, that moment when Trump issued the executive order to ban people from 7 different Muslim countries from entering, leaving lots of people stranded and that, and thousands of people went out to the airports and, you know, said no, right? No, we don't go along with this. We are not that sort of a country. We are going to disrupt the workings of this. And that order was rescinded. The courts slapped it down. That was a powerful counter spectacle. So, and a powerful act of magic. So think about how to create those counter spectacles. But in the meantime, like I said, going down and voting really costs you very little. Time, energy, anything else. And it does make a difference who gets in.
Coming from a place of peace and going up against violence.
So the question was, can I give an example of coming from a place of peace and going up against violence, maybe from our personal lives? You know, again, I saw that at Standing Rock. I saw wonderful Indigenous elder Cheryl Angel lead us up to the barricades and stand there with another amazing woman named LaDonna, whose land we'd been camped on, talking to the police. The police were on the other side of the barricades, and just basically saying, like, you are, you know, we are doing this for you as well as for us. We don't see you as the enemy. This is for your children. You know, LaDonna was saying, like, I grew up here. My dad was a cop. You know, we probably went to the same school. You know, this land is your land too. we want to protect it. And I saw the cops, like first they were like stony faced, like cops are. And then gradually, like they began to twitch a little bit. And I noticed they were starting to like very faintly nod. And then I noticed like their eyes had traveled over and they were making eye contact. And by the end they were like nodding. You know.
My question is, will you vote for me?
If only I lived here, you'd have my vote. But I will say this, that one of the ways the right wing built power in the United States over decades was they very consciously, strategically took over small little things, school boards, you know, little elections that don't seem that important, that don't take that much money to run, but they did that, and over time they built that base. There's no reason why progressive people can't do that too. And there are things you can run for, like school boards, that actually are really important. There are things like water boards and utility boards and transport boards that, again, may seem like the most boring thing in the world, and they may be. I'm not saying everyone should do this, but if you're the type of person who could or can, those boards sometimes make really key decisions. Sometimes it's water boards who determine if development can happen and if more water hookups can be made. Sometimes it's transport boards. I know someone who got herself on the BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit Board in Oakland, and was instrumental in starting to get the buses to run on biodiesel that they make from reclaimed grease from restaurants. There are ways in which doing that can start to build an impact, and then that builds more models, and then that actually builds a base for those larger changes. So good for you for taking that risk to run.
I've been trying to step into my power lately, and the couple of times that I have tried to do it, I've been really trying to become a healer. And every time I've made a step in that direction, I've had a man put me down, and then I shrink based on that.
Yeah, when you step up and stand in your power, there's no guarantee that other people are going to respond positively, unfortunately. And the men with spiritual egos, it's kind of like, I don't know, like plantain in the meadow or dandelions. Well, actually dandelions and plantain are great healing herbs. They're, you know, it's like there's plenty of weeds, and there always will be. And you pull one out and there'll be another one, right? Right. And another one. So the key to that, I think, is when you said then you shrink. Like to see where can you get support in your life? What kind of work can you do? What kind of healing work can you do for yourself? So when those things pop up, you don't shrink. You remain in your power, because that is something you have a right to do and to be. And if you do that, you may find that those spiritual egos kind of shrivel and fall away. Yeah.
So I work with kids and youth in like a lot of different settings, from like daycare to high school age, none of which are like the areas that I work within and have like a specific social justice kind of mandate. But I guess I'm wondering if you have any like good kind of practical activism strategies for like bringing the issues of food security and like accessibility and decolonization and stuff to kids in a way that isn't so pushy that their parents will be angry with me and then I'll get fired from my job. So that's like part one. And part two was, I would really love to hear your thoughts on like self-care as they fit into your work as like an activist and as a witch, but like beyond yoga and bubble baths. Like I feel like a lot of mainstream like self-care discourse is like, oh, just take a bath or like meditate, but I want to hear about how you see self-care, as something that's like bigger and broader than that.
Well, I think with kids, there's a lot of subversive ways to get those messages across, and sometimes they're more effective than, I think of a time when I had my friend's son for the day. He was about 6 years old, and it happened to be Martin Luther King Day. So we were driving around, we were listening to like the radical radio station, and it was like, political correctness day for my part. I kept breaking in with little lectures about slavery and how bad it was, and the civil rights movement, and how people had suffered, and these things on and on and on throughout the day. And finally, at the end of the day, Guthrie looked at me, he said, "Boy, I'm glad I'm not black." I kind of went, that wasn't really what I was going for. But I was talking about it later to one of my friends who is black, and she's like, "Oh, he got it." Yeah. So I think the work we do with kids, first of all, the more you can get them outside, the more they can actually have real connections with nature, the more they can get to play and get their hands in the dirt, and the more you can get them into a garden, the more that in the garden they can actually experience the consequences of what they do. I think that's actually building those lessons in a more subtle way. The more you can get them to connect with people who are different from them, to visit other cultures, institutions, or other churches, or to connect with play groups from a different part of town, or to do things together, or to take them to cultural events where they learn something. Again, the more you can start to build that kind of range of knowledge. And really being clear with kids, if stuff comes up with that, if you hear them repeating stuff or bullying each other or responding in ways, like really being clear that's what's okay and what's not okay. I think it's important to give kids that kind of grounding. As far as self-care goes, I agree, I'm not a bath person. Maybe a hot tub once in a while. But I think self-care isn't just about taking bubble baths. It's really about tuning into what you need on a deep level, to what your body and your intuition is telling you. Sometimes that might be like, this is the all-out moment where we actually have to work day and night and get this thing to happen. And that might actually be self-care. But also understanding none of us are superhuman. If you have a moment like that, it can't be like a 6-month stint. It can't be like a 5-year stint of all out fun. It's got to have a rhythm to it. It's got to have a pulse. And people have different pulses. Some people, I'm notorious for liking to work flat out, but I like to do that and then have time where I can just relax and let go. Sometimes other people around me are dropping like flies, and need more of a different pulse and a different rhythm and more intermittent rest and stops and breaks. And it's taken me decades to learn, I have to also respect that. Tuning into your body in terms of the sleep that you need, in terms of what you need to eat. Sleep is important in an era like ours. Knowing what actually really relaxes you. That might be deep meditation, or it might be going out in nature, or it might be, binge watching the Great British Baking Show. Whatever it is, make some time for that.
I guess in the West, the environmental movement we have here, oftentimes I perceive it as being a very white thing. So we have a very specific approach to how we do environmentalism. And like, I appreciate that you talked a lot about Indigenous sovereignty and revitalization as being such a key integral part of that. So I was wondering if you could speak specifically to any experience you have between sort of bridging those gaps between those kinds of movement, like basically environmental racism as a thing, and like how you can see to sort of make those connections.
Yeah, you know, the organization I have, which is Earth Activist Training, which does the permaculture teaching with spirit and activism. You know, we went through a process. At one point we were saying, like, our courses are great, they're wonderful, we have all these incredible activists, but they are like 99% white, maybe 90%. But, and you know, maybe that's okay. Maybe our role isn't to go in and drag in people of other colors to make ourselves look better. Maybe what we should be doing is looking for where are there things happening that we can support. And have also learned a lot about how to facilitate those groups so they can feel welcoming and they can build those connections, and we can create an atmosphere that encourages everyone to actually build real relationships with each other. And one of the things I usually do is I start off by talking about how our identities are actually complex things. Because I think oftentimes when we start talking about decolonizing and diversity and stuff, we kind of get locked into things that are not necessarily end up being that productive. And that comes from this need to sort of see ourselves allied as one particular identity when we're actually kind of full human beings. At the same time, those identities are real and they have real impacts on us in ways that we can't always control and that go beyond anything we can do in a group. You know, but at the same time, it's not really empowering to anyone to be seen as a color or just as a gender or just as a background. So it's kind of a dance, saying that is part of us, but it's not all of us. So I like to start off by talking about that and saying, you know, your identity, if you are a First Nations person, your identity might be your tribe, or it might be the place you come from, or it might be your clan within that tribe. If you know, it might be your race, or it might be your gender, your preferred gender pronoun, or it might be where your grandparents came from when they immigrated, or you know, it might be the sports team that you support, you know, or whether you're a Mac or a PC user, you know, right? There are all kinds of ways we construct our identities, and I usually give people time to talk about that with each other in pairs or small groups, and then we introduce ourselves to the group. And we continue to try to do things like that in the group, again, to kind of constantly reinforce that our commitment is to show up and connect to each other in the fullness and the complexity of who we are, and to make a space where we can each show up with that and be welcome with that and have our values seen and affirmed.
And so the question I have, because being a person who's accumulated, you could say, some power, authority, when you look around and see injustice as a person in authority, how do you turn, and how do you share power, and how do you do that well? And so how, as a person who awakens to that and realizes the imbalance, what advice do you have for making those kinds of transitions well?
Well, first of all, I'd say consciously make the distinction between different kinds of power. There is one kind of power we could call power over, and with that kind of power, you know, like if you have it, I don't. You know, like if you are my boss and you can hire and fire me, generally I don't get to hire and fire you. But there's also other kinds of power that are not limited. I like to call power from within. You know, creative power, the power to write, the power to talk, the power to stand up and speak your truth, the power to sit on a cushion and meditate, all those kinds of things they're actually closer to the root meaning of the word power, which means literally comes from Latin that means ability. That's why in French, pouvoir is both power and to be able. Right? In Spanish, poder is the same. So I think it's always possible to support people in taking on more of that power from within. And that doesn't take away from anybody else's power. Your power as a Zen patriarch, the part of your power that's about your discipline and your spiritual connection, that doesn't take away from anybody's power. In fact, it may empower others from what you can teach and what you can model and what you can show. So we can always try to foster more of that kind of power. Then when there is power over, making sure that it is fair and accountable. And that ideally everyone has a chance to earn it. I don't know how it works in your tradition, but it's like one of my friends who had been in our feminist anarchist collective for years, got a job teaching at a university. And when I asked her how she liked it, she said, "I love being in a hierarchy." She said, because I know what my job is, and I only have to do my job, and it gives me the authority to critique my students. Then there's also a third kind of power I call social power, and that you might call that respect or influence or rank. It's not always the same as decision-making power. Right now, I have a lot of social power right here in this room because you're all listening to me and I'm talking more than anybody else. And I got the microphone, right? But I don't have any power over any of you. I can't fire you. I can't get you a job. I can't make you lose your job. I can't make you go out and vote for the candidate I think you should vote for, even if I knew who that was in your Canadian election, right? And I think in groups we often have differentials of that social power. It's a lot of what I wrote about in the empowerment manual. I don't think we can necessarily equalize that, but what we can try to do is make sure that social power, again, is earned, that people gain it by taking responsibility, by helping the group to function, by building a track record of showing up and responding and learning and caring for others and taking care of others. And that we're not allocating social power unfairly because of someone's skin color or their gender or their money or some extraneous thing that turns it into what we call privilege. And that's a long, interesting art to do in organizations. But I think that organizations thrive when people can fairly earn social power. And they don't thrive when privilege is operating, when unfair social power is operating, or when people who do stuff to earn social power can't actually get any benefits from it because the group's so devoted to their egalitarian ideals that as soon as anyone actually exercises power, they turn on them. Right.
Thank you so much for coming to Sooke. Because Starhawk has to go back to our village tonight, we don't want to keep her out too late because I think she has a full day tomorrow.
Yeah.
Starhawk, you have done such amazing weaving of so many threads, and I think that everybody here is going to be taking away something different. And I hope it inspires each of our visions and gives us a first step as we create our own maps into whatever future it is that we're creating.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. I would love to end with raising a little power in a magical way.